Joining me for the finale of Property Deal Sourcing Week 2016 on Property Tribes are my guest Anthony Ayton, landlord and founder of Property Tribes Repo List. And Anthony, throughout the week we've been talking about how there are so many variables in deal sourcing and it's not an exact science, but one thing that is absolutely certain is that numbers will never lie. They will always tell you the truth. And I think
are the truth.
They are the truth. And as a for instance, one way that I tend to value a property is I look at what borrowing the rental income will support. And to me, that tells me how it stacks.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good way to look at it. But there are other ways to kind of look at it, and you've got a few tips, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that I think people really need to wake up and look at, and I mean, at the moment, things are, you know, for want of a better word, they're fairly easy, actually, because you've got a really low interest rate environment. You know, you can make all sorts of mistakes and get away with it at the moment. This will not always be the case. You know, we've got the lowest interest rates for 500 years. But people need to understand the difference between, you know, kind of a theoretical yield and what actually happens, you know, and, you know, I'll give you some examples. When you look at property in sort of the really low end of the northwest, where you can buy a property for £40,000, on paper, it looks like you've got a 12% yield and, you know, you're making your £400 per month. But what people fail to recognise is that if you have a problem with a boiler on a £40,000 house, that's 1 year's profit wiped out in one. But if that same problem occurred in London, it doesn't wipe out your entire profits. You know, obviously the effective yields, I think people are now a bit wiser. They know that, you know, your property isn't necessarily going to be let out 100% of the time. But one of the areas, and because I receive so much advertising, because I used to source property, so I get things from other agents, you know, I used to see a lot of headline yields on HMOs, and you know, for a couple of years that was mainly what we used to supply. So I understood how these things worked. And what I never used to see with these HMOs was what the council tax was, what the electricity was, what the gas was, you know.
You've got licensing.
Yeah, what the turnover is. And, you know, so an 18% yield is never, in HMO terms, is never an 18% yield. It's never even close. On a single let occupancy, you've got greater chance of a 10% yield being close to 10%, but on HMOs it never happens. And, you know, when we return to the subject of numbers don't lie, when I was with clients that were looking at sort of larger properties to convert, and, you know, and HMOs were all the range, I would always, in parallel, make them cost out what it would, you know, how it would look as a single let conversion, because often it's cheaper. And then also when you look at, you know, getting rid of it at the end, you know, the capital side of things, you know, at the end of the day, flats are easier to sell, I think, than HMOs is, but there's more demand for them.
That's very interesting, actually, because one thing that I think people could do, just as a really sort of helpful exercise, is if they've got a property in mind, to work out the yield if it was single occupancy buy-to-let, HMO, maybe even holiday let, and look at those figures and actually see where that property is going to perform best.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, there's a certain amount of fear that we all have for really analysing exactly what it is we're doing. Nobody wants to know that what they're doing is wrong. And, you know, for a large part of my career, I was working with other people's money, so it's easy to be not passionate about it and just to say, I'm going to look at A, B and C, and whichever one looks the best is what I'm going to advise my client to do. Often when it's your own, you arrive with ideas of how you want things to be. You know, you met this guy and he told you HMOs were the, you know, the route to freedom, or what have you. Do all of your homework. You know, even if you only do the maths to say, well, this doesn't work, or, you know, it should be costed down to the level that you can go, well, an HMO will make me that much money, this will make me that much money, and I want that extra 50 quid. So, you know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's really interesting in the context of numbers not lying, because as well as not wanting to spend unnecessary money, investors actually don't want to spend unnecessary time. Time is valuable to us. And I know a lot of people that go running around all over the country like headless chickens, looking at all sorts of properties that actually don't stack up as investments. If you do the numbers at the research stage, when you get your, say, your ping off repo list to say that there's a property come on that meets your criteria, you can do the numbers there and then and say, actually, that doesn't stack for me. Yeah, so don't waste your time going to see it unless you feel that there's something where there's a real angle there.
Yeah, I mean, what we say is that it should operate like a funnel. So, you know, if you look at 100 properties, we think you should visit the best 20% of properties. Yeah. And if you're good at doing desktop valuations, you know, you'll see that some things are easy to say no to. And it's those last 20% where you go, oh, I'm not sure, maybe there's something in there. Those are the ones you go and see. And that's how you do it.
So just to finish, we do hope that you have been enjoying Deal Sourcing Week on Property Tribes. And Anthony, he's got a lot of experience in this area, as he said, and he founded RepoList to help landlords source deals. And Anthony, it's really just another tool in the investor's toolbox, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, the whole idea of RepoList is... I've probably explained this to you before. I didn't do it for other people. I did it selfishly. I did it for me, and then I realised that it might work for other people. It comes from the fact that I couldn't look at enough property quickly enough. When I was looking for repossessed properties or properties that required refurbishment, I had to look at 10 times the number of properties that I was interested in to find ones that looked like they were messed up. And then, work from there. That's what RepoList does for you. It leverages your time. People often think that, you're going to go onto RepoList and suddenly you're going to find something where it's 30% discounted and it tells you that it's 30% discount. Nobody rings a bell and says, here's the profit. It doesn't work like that.
Well, it wouldn't cost $9.99 a month if it did, would it?
And again, I wouldn't be here. No, but what it does do is if you've got an hour a week, then instead of looking at 200 properties which aren't relevant to you, you might spend that time looking at 50 properties which are relevant to you, do your research on those, narrow it down to 4 or 5 that are interesting, and it's about time.
It is indeed. Well, it's been really great having you as my guest here on Deal Sourcing Week, Anthony. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And if you've got any questions about RepoList, do pop them onto Property Tribes, because Anthony is more than happy to help and advise our community how to get the most out of it. So onwards and upwards, Anthony. It's going to be very exciting times, and there's always deals to be had, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always deals to be had. And you've got to remember as well that the value, when people try and put absolute values on things, it doesn't really mean that much. I always think in terms of relative value. If that house is worth that and this one's the same and it's cheaper, it's a deal. I can't tell you, how much, a bunch of bricks in a street is worth, except by reference to other bunches of bricks in a street.
And I think, it's very important that everybody understands their own goals and make sure that the property that they put an offer in on and gets accepted, that property is going to take them one step closer towards their goals. So it's very, very important to do the due diligence, and we'll pop some links underneath this video to help with property due diligence as well, because that's really at the heart of this.
Come back to that? Yeah. And where that is particularly important is in terms of time. You mentioned people running up all over the UK. Do you want a portfolio where you've got 6 lettings agents, different kinds of properties, different kinds of problems spread all over the country? Or, was that your dream when you got into property? Or would you like to have one method that works for you that you continue to expand on until you decide you want to do another method? And I think for a lot of people, time is important. It's not just money, your time is important. And so the easier your method is to manage, the more enjoyment you're going to get from it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being my guest this week, Anthony. And we do hope that you've enjoyed watching Property Tribes Deal Sourcing Week 2016 and taken away some tips from it.